Welcome to Introduction to the Junk Rig Part 3. My name is Mark Case. I'm Chairman of the Junk Rig Association, and this is the third in our series of presentations to help introduce you to the junk rig. In Parts 1 and 2, we dealt with the evolution of modern leisure boats, which are driven by sails and rigging adapted from the traditional sailing vessels of East Asia, and with some of the main characteristics of the modern version of the junk rig. In Part 3, Knowing the Ropes, we will introduce some of the intricacies of the rigging of a modern junk rig. Those of us who sail boats with junk rigs are used to receiving some interest from other sailors. It's because our boats are a little different, because they can be elegant and attractive, and because sailors are always interested in how it is that sails capture the wind to drive a boat forward. So we get asked a lot of questions. Why the junk rig? Because we like it, it suits us, it suits the sailing that we do. Does it go to windward? Yes, quite well actually, especially if well rigged and well sailed. Aren't there a lot of ropes to learn? Now that's a good question. Just looking at these images, it's clear that a junk rigged boat does indeed have a lot of ropes to learn. And many of them are quite different to those you may have learnt on a more conventional sailing vessel. We already dealt with some of these ropes, sheets and lazy jacks in particular, in Part 2, but this presentation will hopefully answer some of your questions about all those other lines on a junk rig boat. Just remember, every boat is different, so we're going to talk about the most typical rigging lines here. The halyard. The most important rope or line on a junk rig boat is the halyard. There is one for each sail, and without it there would be no sailing. The halyard connects the yard, which holds the top of the sail, to the top of the mast. When the halyard is pulled, the yard is raised, and the sail raises with it. When released, the weight of the sail, yard and battens pulls the sail down and away from the top of the mast, so lowering it. As you can see from the red arrows here, the route that the halyard follows is from an attachment point on the yard, up to the top of the mast, through a pulley or block arrangement, down to the deck, and from the deck into the cockpit of the boat. So when a halyard is pulled towards the cockpit, pressure is exerted upwards on the halyard, and the sail will be raised. As you can see from the model here, the sail is stretched over a framework of the yard at the top, battens at intervals and a boom at the bottom of the sail, so it's a good deal heavier than a conventional sail. For this reason, the halyard often runs through a pulley arrangement which eases the effort required to raise the sail. You can see in the example a four-part block arrangement on a 22-foot sailing vessel. The good news is that with this four-part system, it's not too difficult to raise the sail. With smaller boats, the skipper doesn't require a winch to raise the sail, as you can see in the video here. Junk rig sailors use one word that is rarely heard on other vessels, the word parrel. A parrel is simply a rigging line, especially one that goes around the mast. One special example is the yard hauling parrel. You can see it in this picture. It's a line that runs from the yard, around the mast and back to the yard before running down to the deck. When the line is pulled, the loop around the mast is tightened and the yard is pulled more tightly against the mast. This line helps with the set of the sail and in transmitting wind power through the mast into the boat. Let's use the model to take a closer look at how that works. Here again you can see the arrow that indicates the loop of line that holds the yard relatively close to the mast. The line starts the loop at the yard, passes around the mast, back to the yard where it runs through a block and down to the deck. And from there the line is led into the cockpit. So you can see how pulling on the line at the cockpit tightens the loop to pull the yard in towards the mast. You can probably also see from this that if the sail is lowered, the yard hauling parrel will become loose and may have to be tightened up again. Every boat's different and they each have their own rigging arrangements, but a yard hauling parrel is pretty much universal on junk rig boats. Except for some specialised type of junk rig derivatives, you will also find batten parrels on every junk rig boat, although they can be configured in different ways. These lines connect each batten more or less loosely to the mast. When the wind is blowing from the opposite side of the mast to that where the sail hangs, the batten parrels capture, together with the yard hauling parrel and the halyard and sheets, the force of the wind. Because there's one for each batten, the wind forces are well distributed along the mast. Generally speaking, these parrels are not adjustable while sailing, so while their positioning can certainly affect the set of the sail and how far forward or aft it's positioned, they're not intended to make sail adjustments on the fly. Let's look at this real example. Perhaps you can pick out the batten parrels. A luff hauling parrel is a line that loops, perhaps more than once, from a batten around the mast and back to the batten below, then bringing the line to the deck and back into the cockpit. Let's see that here. When the line is pulled in the cockpit, the loops tighten around the mast and the battens are pulled back. When the line is released, the battens are free to shift forward again under the weight of the sail. Hasler and MacLeod, the authors of Practical Junk Rig, the slightly dated but still highly relevant Bible of junk rig construction, describe the luff hauling parrels as a system to provide rapid adjustment from the deck of the fore and aft position of the battens. In other words, the battens, and the sail between them of course, can be adjusted in position relative to the mast. Most junk rig boats will have some form of luff hauling parrel, although the arrangements can vary between boats. The luff hauling parrels assist in determining how the sail is set and provide some downward tension on the luff of the sail, so that the leading edge of the sail presents a sharper surface to the wind. They can be used too, perhaps in conjunction with a tack parrel, to pull the centre of effort of the sail aft. If the vessel has lee helm, is inclined to turn away from the wind in the prevailing conditions, or to let the centre of effort move forward if the boat is inclined to steer into the wind, weather helm. You can see the luff hauling parrels here, in yellow, from another angle. Again, you can see how it leads from the front of a batten, around the mast and back to the next batten, so that hauling on the rope will pull the battens back towards the mast. Here's a photograph of how that looks on a real junk rig. We can highlight the luff hauling parrels for convenience. So we've seen how the set of the sail can be adjusted by moving the battens fore and aft. It makes sense that the boom, which in many ways is just the lowest batten on a junk rig sail, would also be adjustable, and it often is. But there are so many different arrangements for adjusting the boom, kicking straps, tensioners, downhauls and the like, very often peculiar to individual boats and skippers. These all, in some form or another, deal with keeping the boom down in some way, although generally the booms on junk rig boats are not under the kind of high tensions that one would see in many Bermudan rig boats. But for today's presentations, we'll deal with only fore and aft adjustments of the boom, in particular the tack parrel and what we can call the boom hauling parrel. First, the tack parrel. At its simplest, this is a standing or fixed loop from the front of the boom around the mast and back. As you can see, shown in yellow here, a loop like this will stop the boom from sliding forward relative to the mast. Many skippers, however, prefer an adjustable arrangement. In this case, the loop can be tightened or loosened from the cockpit, so drawing the boom and sail above it backwards or letting it fall forwards. As you can imagine, this can be used in conjunction with the luff hauling parrels to adjust the position of sail panels from the top of the sail to the bottom, for example, to aid in balancing the sail. Some boats also have a line for pulling the boom forward. You can see a line indicated here by the arrow. It may not be clear to see, but this line runs from the boom, loops around the mast and back to the boom, and is then led to the deck and into the cockpit. Let's see that clearly in yellow. As with several other parrels, you can see here that pulling the line tightens the loop which pulls the boom forward. Together with a running tack line, this gives a lot of control over the fore and aft position of the boom. We junk rig sailors like to imagine our boats gliding swiftly through the water in perfect balance and with beautifully full sails. Sometimes the reality is a bit different. Often, perhaps especially with cambered sails, we find that wrinkles or creases of one sort or another are spoiling the set of our sail. In particular, we often have to deal with long horizontal creases, which both look unsightly, but more importantly, rob the sail of some of its designed camber, making for less power in the sail. You can see these here and here. There are various ways to address this problem, but let's deal specifically with two of these, which can be used separately or together. The first approach is to use a throat hauling parrel. This is a line that again uses a loop around the mast to make an adjustment. In this case, a line is run from an attachment point at the throat of the sail, where the front of the sail is attached to the yard, around the mast and back, and then runs down to the deck and into the cockpit. This line, when hauled inwards, pulls the front of the yard down and backwards. This means that by virtue of the seesaw effect, the top of the yard is pulled forward and upwards, which in turn pulls on the back or leech of the sail and helps to pull out the creases in the sail. Being near the top of the luff, a well-adjusted throat hauling parrel can help determine how the sail is going to hang from the yard, and it's often a good idea to adjust this before moving on to luff hauling parrels or boom adjustments. Another approach to helping keep the creases out of junk-rigged sails and spreading loads on the sail across the whole framework of mast, yard, battens and boom are so-called Hong Kong parrels. These lines are not to be found or even required on all junk rigs, but are nonetheless found essential by some skippers depending on their rig and the set of their sails. You can see them here in red. We've only shown 3 to avoid making the image too busy, but typically there'll be one each for all or most of the sail panels. The Hong Kong parrel is not a loop. It runs from the front of one batten to an attachment point behind the mast on the batten below. In this way, the weight of the lower batten and the sail hanging from it acts to pull the upper batten back and downwards, tensioning the luff or front of the sail while also peaking up the back of the upper batten, helping to keep creases from forming within the panel. You can see Hong Kong parrels on this lovely boat sailing in Norway. We've highlighted some of them in red to make them easy to find in the picture. And you can see that the parrels and other riggings have made for a finely balanced sailing boat. Well, that concludes the introduction to the junk rig series for now. By now, you really have been shown the ropes, as far as junk rig boats are concerned. There's a lot more to know, of course, and future videos will deal with junk rigs in more depth. We at the Junk Rig Association aim to promote the rig and provide easily accessible and relevant material to people interested in it. Visit us at www.junkrigassociation.org, where you can find a lot of help or even join us for a nominal fee. Good sailing to you.